All right, welcome everybody. I don't even know what this is. Part five, part six. We're continuing in our Rambam series. So we're going to be talking about one of his letters today. Share screen. All right, you guys see the Microsoft Word thing that I have here? Is that showing on the screen?
I see it, Rabbi.
Okay, good. All right, so uh, Igaret Hashema, his letter on forced conversion, or Ma'amar Kiddush Hashem, essay on the sanctification of God's name. Two different letters. He didn't name them. They were written publicly, meaning it was to an individual. I'm sorry, to a community, not to an individual. It's known by these two different names. The letter concerning forced conversion, forced apostasy, or the essay on the imperative to sanctify God's name, which discusses martyrdom. Now, these titles were given later. Rambam did not title these himself. He just wrote the letter. This is what people later on started to refer to it as. Do not confuse this with Igaret Taman, which we're going to talk about later. This letter here is already going to take 2 weeks to get through, and then that one will be next. So the context of the letter. It's written in Arabic using Hebrew letters. Rambam wrote this at age 27 while living in Fez, Morocco, before settling Egypt. Now, his two biggest works are Mishnah Torah and More in the Guide for the Perplexed. I'm more into Mishnah Torah, but in our circles, these are the two works that makes Rambam most popular. This was written before he wrote either one of those. So you would think, well, because he hadn't done those yet, he wasn't popular yet. He hadn't done the work that he became famous for. But this goes to show that since this predates Mishnah Torah, he already had a reputation of being a Talmud Chacham around regions of like Spain and North Africa. So word of mouth had already spread about him. People already knew this was like a big rabbi before he even composed those two big works. So it addresses Jews facing extreme persecution under the Almohads, a fanatical Islamic regime in North Africa that forced Jews to convert or face death. They were stopped on the street and required to affirm Islam on the spot or be killed. I guess you have to say the Shahada or whatever it is. So it's not only that their lives were put in jeopardy. If they didn't do it, then not only were they going to be killed, but they were sacrificing their children. Because what happens to the children when the parents are killed? Then the children are going to be raised by Muslims. Potentially something worse. Who knows? So this letter responds to an unnamed rabbi. And I think he specifically did not name the rabbi because of how mad he was at this rabbi. He didn't want to like make him famous for doing something that Rambam considered this rabbi to be making a big error. So he didn't name the rabbi that he's referring to. But the unnamed rabbi harshly condemned Jews who outwardly converted under duress, declaring their mitzvot worthless and labeling them idolaters. Think about what that means. Because these Jews, they failed to give their life. Now, you guys know what the big three are. What three are we supposed to be giving our life for rather than going along with? Anybody know? You're supposed to be prepared. Whether you do it or not, you're supposed to be prepared to give your life rather than to commit the act of murder, certain sexual immoralities like male homosexuality, bestiality, rape. Someone tells you to do that or I'm going to kill you, you're supposed to be willing to give your life to say, I'm not going to do that. And idolatry, vodazora. Those are the big three that you're supposed to be ready to die rather than engage in those three things. So some of these people, they decided I can't do it. I can't really allow myself to be beheaded. So they converted outwardly. So this unnamed rabbi is saying, not only are you not Jewish anymore, like you're Kegoet, you're like all these Noahites. You just have to follow 7 laws and don't do anything else. He's saying if you do any mitzvot, it's worthless and you're a Rasha. You're an evil person. Every time you put on tefillin, every time you observe Shabbat, every time you honor your mother and father, every time you do any mitzvah, this is something you're going to be punished for because you're supposed to be dead. You were supposed to give your life. This is what this unnamed rabbi was telling people. So it's not even like you're just not Jewish anymore. Just live like the non-Jews. You're no longer obligated to fulfill the mitzvot. He's saying you better not fulfill any mitzvot because you chose not to give up your life. So Rambam was very upset about this. So the unnamed rabbi declared them evil Rashayim, invalidated their mitzvot, and claimed that God rejected their observance. The rabbi's ruling was dangerously demoralizing, implying Jews who converted out of Judaism should abandon Judaism entirely. The Rambam angrily refutes this, calling it spiritually destructive. This rabbi was living a life of comfort and not facing these threats and telling these other Jews that they had to give up their lives rather than make the statement that Allah is God and Muhammad is his messenger, or whatever the statement was. They were being forced to either make or be beheaded. So this is not like this unnamed rabbi was in the trenches with them. It's that movie Gladiator, where the guy's like rallying, all the people, but his life is being in jeopardy as well, and he's like rallying the people. It's not like that. This unnamed rabbi was sitting somewhere else with in a place of safety with like armed guards protecting them, sending out a decree. You people need to give your lives. Me, I'm not in danger. I'm not one of the pawns in chess. I'm over here from my place of safety telling you need to be ready to die for this. So there was a level of hypocrisy there that Rambam was upset about. So not only that, but this rabbi said that if they say nothing at all, if all they do is enter a mosque, then they are an idol worshiper. And any mitzvah that they do afterwards is a sin that will be counted against them. Now, usually, if you ask any ignorant Jew, if there's a possibility that we can save a life, not even a guarantee, there's a guy that's injured, but it's Shabbat. Probably going to die anyway. Maybe we can only extend his life by an hour or so. What do we transgress Shabbat? Everybody's going to tell you. You pick him up, you carry him to a car, you drive him to the hospital, you do whatever it takes, even if it doesn't save his life. Even if there's a possibility that he'll die, you just extend his life for 1 minute. You do whatever it takes to attempt to save that life. Everybody will tell you that. But this unnamed rabbi is saying, if all you have to do is go to a mosque for pikuach nefesh, to appease the people that are threatening to kill you, you don't do it. You die. You make sure, you do not comply with pikuach nefesh. To save a life, we don't do that. So this would mean if a Jew went to a mosque to appease the Muslim rodef, the Muslim threat to him, to save his own life, pikuach nefesh, and then went home and put on tefillin, he would be sinning by putting on tefillin. That message is what made Rambam get involved. He could not allow that unnamed rabbi telling people that they might as well not be Jewish. So this was not a letter that somebody said, hey, Rambam, this guy's telling me I'm an idolater now because I tried to save my life. I didn't convert. All I did was go to him with a mosque to show that I'm not against his religion. And this rabbi is saying, I can't put on tefillin anymore. I'm going to Gehenna if I put on tefillin. Nobody asked Rambam this for his opinion. What I just read in my introduction to the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation, you have an obligation to say, I disagree with what I see happening. You have an obligation to use your voice. And this is what Rambam did. Nobody asked him his opinion. He saw this rabbi telling people this, and he got involved and said, no, this is wrong. This is not the way it has to be. He could not allow the unnamed rabbi telling people that they might as well not be Jewish. Which sounds terrible what this rabbi was saying, but it reminds me of the story of a rabbi telling a Jew who set foot in the courtyard of a church to beat up a guy who owed him money that he needs to fast every year on the anniversary of the day that he did that. Because of setting foot in an outdoor courtyard, not for beating up the non-Jew who owed him money. we were talking about this, I think, last week off the recording. There's a rabbi that gave a shiur where a Jew loaned money to a non-Jew. Non-Jew owed him money, so he was chasing them to get the money back. The guy that was fleeing, the non-Jew, went into the courtyard of a church, outdoor, didn't even set foot in the building. So the Jew went into the courtyard, beat him up, got the money. Then he asked his rabbi, did I do anything wrong? The rabbi said, not for beating him up, getting your money. There's nothing wrong with that. But because you set foot in the outdoor courtyard of a church, you need to fast every year on the anniversary of the day you did that. That needs to be an obligatory fast day for you. How dare you set foot on the outdoor courtyard of a church on a Tuesday, not even like when a church service was happening. Coincidentally, Rabbi Raps, Chabad, just put out a video. They paid off, their Chabad was started in a church dedicated to Christianity. They took over the mortgage. They just paid it off. Imagine the rabbi telling you if you set foot outside of a church building, you need to fast every year on the anniversary of the day you did that. Imagine sitting there listening to that. Well, I go to Chabad for Shabbat. It's in a church every Shabbat. This is where a Chabad is. So there's rabbis that are teaching this harsh stuff today, and it's not universal. Not everybody agrees with it. It's always been that way. There's always been people who disagree with that type of thing. But this is what the unnamed rabbi was doing. So Rambam was furious that Jews were being told that if they can't do everything perfect, that they shouldn't bother doing what they could. Okay, I don't think Yochanan is in here, but he took a course at this online yeshiva called Ravu Manhig. They were teaching there in that course. Now, we talked about the three that you're supposed to be willing to give your life for. In this online yeshiva, this is a smicha program that we were in. And the rabbi there taught, as Jews, we put on our right shoe first, then we put on our left shoe. If somebody tells you you need to put on your left shoe first, then you put on your right shoe, you need to be prepared to die. Because you say we are Jews, we put on our right shoe first, we're not going to put on our left shoe first. You tell us to do anything other than what we do as Jews, you need to be prepared to give your life. Some of you were probably here. Asher used to do these Sunday morning things where I told him about that. I said, is this right? And he said, that is not the example that I would have used. So he didn't want to criticize the rabbi that was teaching that. So that rabbi is teaching, if you have a minhag, custom and tradition, not even halakhically binding, somebody tells you to do it the other way, you should give your life. You don't compromise on anything. What we're going to learn here later, that rabbi in the yeshiva did not enunciate, he did not tell, is that there is a difference between if somebody, let's say there's this crazy king that you're living in some country, and that king says, you know what, it's going to be a law in our country, everybody puts on their left shoe first. Jews, non-Jews, that's the law of the land. You put on your left shoe first, then your right. You do not need to, nor should you give up your life because of that. The point that the rabbi in that yeshiva did not make is that outside of the big three, if somebody is singling you out to erase the religion, to say Judaism is not going to exist in this land, you put on your shoes this way, I don't care how non-Jews do it, Jews are going to no longer continue this practice. This is what the rabbi in yeshiva was describing. If Judaism is being singled out for eradication, then you should fight to keep it alive, to save it. Not just because in America, somebody says, I don't like that you're doing this, it's a different situation. So there's a metric in place. It's not just a blanket. Somebody tells me to eat kitniot on for Pesach, I'll die before I eat rice. It's absurd. But that was not being taught in the yeshiva. They articulated it as anything that we do, you fight to the death to make sure we don't change. And I think that is incorrect. That's an incorrect way to be teaching. It's an obvious example that today These types of harsh things are still being taught. And Rambam was against that. Okay, so the purpose of the letter. He seeks to comfort, and this is going to come up. What's because there's some contradiction. So what's the purpose of the letter? Obviously, he's seeking to comfort and encourage Jews who have already went through this process. They've already decided they're not going to give up their life. They're not going to become a martyr. That's why this unnamed rabbi started saying all these horrible things to them. You're scum. I better not catch you trying to fulfill mitzvot because you know you're going to be punished in the afterlife for even attempting to fulfill a mitzvot because of what you did. You should be ashamed of yourself for not voluntarily getting beheaded. So they had already made this decision when the unnamed rabbi started attacking them. So the Rambam is trying to comfort these people and encourage them who succumbed to forced conversion, countering the demoralizing ruling of the other rabbi. He emphasizes that mitzvot performed under such terrible circumstances still hold value and that Jews must continue observing Torah as much as possible. Meaning, even if you are doing a big sin like avodah zarah, you should still abstain from theft and shotness, and you should still wash your hands and do all the things that you are still obligated to do. It's not like, well, I forgot this was Yom Kippur and I ate breakfast. Well, I guess laws don't apply to me anymore. Now I can just violate whatever I want. No, you still are obligated to do everything you're supposed to do, even if you fell short in an area that's maybe bigger than other areas. You're still obligated in the mitzvah. Leadership and empathy. Rambam criticized the unnamed rabbi for judging Jews harshly without experiencing their suffering. He heard what the rabbi was saying, and Rambam took the initiative to issue the letter. There's a famous line in Pirkei Avot that says, in a place where no leader of men can be found, strive to be a leader of men. That's what he did. He was not asked for his opinion, but when he heard the statement that mitzvot do not count, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and he had to get involved. Not that he had to correct every mistake and that every idiot makes, but this was the hill to die on for him. And I can relate when I hear people telling converts that they're not Jewish, they shouldn't do this or that, it doesn't count. I defend them. I get involved. Not that anyone listens to me like they do with Rambam. And sometimes those same people, they're like, hey, I appreciate you showing me what the halakha is. I appreciate you showing me what the counter argument is. When they tell me my conversion was invalid or that I'm not Jewish because I have a dog as a pet, which is not prohibited, I appreciate you showing me how to defend myself, how to counter all these people that are mistreating me. That's great. I'm glad you did that. But then I say something that they disagree with, and they're like, how they hate me. And it is what it is. But that's sort of the hill to die on for me is when I see converts being mistreated. And this was the hill to die on for Rambam. Like, I'm getting involved. I don't care if it makes me unpopular. I'm not going to allow this to happen. Jews being mistreated by these people. And remember, Rambam was attacked by Jews. He was accused of converting to Islam. His books were famously burned by Jews. These were Jews burning his books because they hated him. So he had the courage to get involved even when it wasn't popular. And he knew he was going to be attacked. By the way, I put that in my book. I'm telling people now. They brought this up in the JPLF thing when I was accepted to the board. One of the other rabbis there is an author. He's written 20 books. And they said, Rabbi Yosef, you're an author too, right? You've written one book. I said, two at the same time. Same book. First one and my last one. I have no intentions of doing it again. But one of the things I put in here in the very beginning was it's from the introduction to Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed. He said, how then shall I now make a beginning and discuss them? But I rely on two precedents. First, similar to our sages applied the verse. To similar cases, our sages applied the verse. It's time to do something in honor of the Lord, for they have made void thy law. Secondly, they have said, let all the aspects be guided by pure intentions. On these two principles I relied while composing some parts of this work. Lastly, when I have a difficult subject before me, and when I find the road narrow, I see no other way of teaching a well established truth except by pleasing one intelligent man and displeasing 10,000 fools. I prefer to address myself to the one man and take no notice whatsoever of the condemnation of the multitude. I prefer to extricate that intelligent man from his embarrassment and show him the cause of his perplexity, so that he may attain perfection and be at peace. That's from his introduction to the Guide for the Perplexed. So he relied on two principles. Number one, his intention was pure. His intention was not to cause chaos, even though he knew it was going to cause chaos. And two, somebody had to do it. It had to be done. And if people want to hate me for doing it, that's fine. But there are people that need to benefit from this. And if people want to hate and attack me, that's fine. But his intention was that he was doing a good thing, and it was not his intent to cause chaos, and somebody's got to do it. So that's what he did here with this letter. And it's also going to come up about how he used sources to justify doing it. It's not like he's just bringing new logic and saying, I got a new idea and that's good enough. I mean, he's using precedent for it. Okay, so he cites examples from the Tanakh where leaders who disparaged the Jewish people were rebuked. Moshe Rabbeinu for saying the Israelites would not believe him, or when he was punished because he struck the rock and he called them rebellious people. Eliyahu Hanavi, removed from prophecy after condemning all Israel in Kings. He was allegedly condemned removed from prophecy after condemning all Israel. Allegedly, he was condemned to attend every Brit Milah. You look at it as a positive thing to attend one today, but if you had to attend every single one of them, I guess that could be a burden. I've been to a couple of them. It's a nice event. Everybody's excited. It's a positive atmosphere. I hang to the back. I don't want to see the actual process going down, but everybody is happy to be there. Yeshayahu Hanavi punished for calling Israel a people of impure lips. Rambam criticizes the unnamed rabbi for publicly shaming repentant Jews. Think about that. These are Jews whose commitment is to the religion. And they're not even trying to be apostates, and they're being publicly shamed. It's a very sad thing. So a leader's role is to uplift, not condemn. Even when people are sinful, we have to be constructive and find ways to help, even if the accusations are true. And this is what Rambam is doing. He's not giving up on people that are still committed to the Torah, to the religion, to their Mizorah, even if they made a mistake, even if they fell short. Look at what's taught today. People who make no attempt, who actively fight against the religion, they're incorrectly called to Noksha Nishma. Oh, he just doesn't know better, didn't have a proper education. So it's not that he means what he says. He hates religion. He publicly desecrates Shabbat. He just doesn't know what Shabbat is. We got to give him the first Aliyah if his name is Cohen. Whatever. But these were people who were devout people who were being attacked. It just goes to show you in our history, people actually felt like what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. People who publicly desecrate Shabbat are kegoye. They are like one who denies the entire Torah. You don't even sit Shiva for them. This is halakha. They're dead to us, They're no longer one of us because they left the religion. These people are trying to be, frum Jews, trying to be Haver, and they're being attacked. Very different version from what you see happening today. A lot of people today, unfortunately, they don't know Jewish history. They just see what's popular today. So must have always been that way, unanimously from Mount Sinai. But it's not true. We have a very diverse history, actually. So, halakhic response to forced conversion. Many Jews outwardly professed Islam, but secretly maintained Judaism. Rambam reassures them they are still part of Klal Israel. You may have had to pretend to be Jewish or to be Islamic, to save your life. You're still a Jew. Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Once a Jew, always a Jew. So the Rambam argues that Jews who outwardly convert under the threat of death are not idolaters, and they should continue observing mitzvot secretly. This is what Jews in Iran do. There's tens of thousands of Jews living in Iran, an Islamic country. Maybe they're not allowed to, publicly celebrate these types of things down the streets of Tehran, but there are synagogues in Tehran, and they fulfill mitzvot. They observe Judaism the way that they can safely. It's the same exact thing. They're not even forced to convert to Islam. They're allowed to be Jewish. But if it becomes hostile and they have to say that they're converting to Judaism, they're still Jews and they still need to fulfill mitzvot. He rejects the idea that mitzvot performed after a forced conversions are worthless or worse, sins, and he's stressing that every mitzvah still counts. Now, here's the contradiction. Remember, this letter was written before Mishnah Torah. And this is why it came up. Was he trying to comfort these people who already went through a forced conversion? He wrote that letter to comfort them after they went through a forced conversion. Keep that in mind, because that's going to come up very soon. So contrast that with Mishnah Torah, which is written much later than this letter. Some rulings in this letter differ from Rambam's later codified halakha, suggesting that he may have prioritized comfort over strict legal accuracy here. Because in Mishnah Torah, he tells you this is one of the big three. Avodah Zarah, of course, you can make the argument that Islam is not Avodah Zarah because they're monotheistic. This is a famous ruling by Rambam, but that's not what happens here, because that's what Rambam could have said, but he didn't. He applied his ruling even to Christianity, which he does consider Avodah Zarah. So when it's saying that he prioritized comfort, consoling these people over legal accuracy, it's saying that later Mishnah Torah is going to say you should have given up your life instead of converting or doing Avodah Zarah. So because Mishnah Torah was written later, it's possible that he changed his mind, and that later when he got to his halakhic rulings of Mishnah Torah, that he said you're supposed to give your life. Or it could be that it's not a contradiction. He didn't change his mind. It could have been that if you ask me, hey, Rabbi, if someone tells me to commit one of these big three, should I give my life? Well, if you know a guy is coming over tomorrow and he's going to bring somebody with him and he's going to tell you, you're going to murder the guy that I'm bringing with me or I'm going to murder you. Well, tomorrow's not here yet. It could be that Rambam's halakhic answer would be, yes, you should give up your life tomorrow. That's the halakhic answer. However, this is not dealing with something that's going to happen tomorrow. This letter was written to people where they were faced with this situation yesterday. So ahead of time, yes, the halakhic answer is you should be willing to give up your life. But Yavad, after the fact, since you did not do the right thing and give up your life, now we're dealing with the letter of comfort. So it's not necessarily that Rambam changed his mind when he wrote Mishnah Torah later, and it's not even necessarily a contradiction. Well, here he said you didn't have to, but there he said you do have to. There's also another metric here. Ahead of time, what's the answer? Okay, you didn't take my halakhic advice. All right, now we're here. How do we deal with this after the fact when you should have given your life, but you didn't. So be at ease. Life is you're still here, you're still alive. You still have to follow mitzvot. So it's not so clear that it's a definite contradiction. So I think when it comes to being willing to give up your life, we can't condemn those who choose life. Even if some arguments are halakhically questionable, you can point to, well, is he wishy-washy? He said this here, but he said this there. Even if it's questionable, the end justifies the means in this case. There's a guy named Professor David Shlomo Salvatore. He wrote a thesis that says this letter is an exercise in rhetoric. He's making a persuasive argument rather than a halakhic analysis. Rambam is not piling on to the other rabbi and said, "Well, what the unnamed rabbi said. It sounds terrible, but halakhically is correct. You people were supposed to end your lives. You're not supposed to be here today." What's he going to do? Pile on? This would seem unusually cruel. So this guy is making the case that the letter is not a halakhic analysis. His goal was to encourage and uplift Jews who were demoralized by the rabbi's harsh ruling with a message that even sinners are filled with mitzvot. And he quotes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, this is the Rashbi, who says, even sinners of Israel are as full of mitzvot as a pomegranate is full of seeds. Rashbi lived 2,000 years ago. This is who Moshe de Leon claims is the original author of the Zohar. So everybody that says, the Rashbi is the author of the Zohar, okay, this is a quote from the Rashbi. So Rambam is quoting well-respected people here. So there's precedent there. Okay, martyrdom. There's a concept of martyrdom being a kiddush Hashem, sanctification, the name of God. We talk about other religions like Islam. These people, they are very devout. Look, I know some Muslims. They are not going to become martyrs at all. But I think we all agree in general, there are large amounts of Muslims that are absolutely willing to give their life for their religion. Like we talked about, do you give your life for which order you put shoes on? There are Muslims, I have no doubt. They look forward to becoming a martyr because that is, I don't know how you say it in Islam, but whatever the equivalent of a Kiddush Hashem would be, they absolutely believe that. So Rambam acknowledges that in our religion, the ideal of martyrdom, there's an argument for it. There's stories of Rabbi Akiva and others, being tortured at the time of their death and somehow being happy. And how could you be happy as you're being skinned alive? And him saying, how many people don't get to say the Shema as the last words before they die? I'm getting to fulfill this as a mitzvah. So there is a concept of that being a very positive thing. Although I don't think we can reasonably expect everybody to feel that way. So he brings up this guy, Yosef Meshita, a collaborator with Rome, who refused to desecrate the temple a second time and was martyred, but recognizes the complexity of the situation, especially when children's futures are at stake. I don't know if it's in here, the story of the woman and her sons. I don't know if it's in here or not. But there's a famous story of a woman, and she had like 7 sons. I think her name was Hannah or something. And her sons were killed one at a time. And each time they said, eat this non-kosher food or say that you believe in some type of idolatry. And one at a time they said, no, we're not going to do it. We'd rather die. And they were all killed in front of her. And it got to the last one. And the guy that was having them executed said, even he was so disgusted. He's like, look, please don't make me do this. Just give in. And she's like, no, you kill all of my children and then you kill me. We're not giving an inch. I put my right shoe on first. I'm not going to put my left shoe on, even to save my last remaining child. They were all killed. And this was viewed as a kiddush Hashem. They were willing to do that rather than to sacrifice anything in the name of Hashem. I find that to be a deeply disturbing story. But there is an argument that they were so devout that this is viewed as very positive. I think it's mentioned in here, but if not, you can look up the story. It's famous. Comparison to Christian martyrdom. Okay, this is one of the things the unnamed rabbi attacked the people who were not willing to die for. He says there were Christians that would rather die than convert to Islam. Christians were so devout, they would rather be martyred than convert to Islam. And we don't respect Christianity. We don't like their religion. We don't take it seriously. Even they were willing to die. We're Jews. We have the Torah, the only gift given. The one true God gave this to us. We can poke holes in the New Testament all day long. And even they were willing to die for this thing which we don't take seriously. But we're not willing to do what Christians are willing to do. This is what the unnamed rabbi was saying, attacking Jews, calling them less than Christians, because even Christians were willing to give their life. How dare you not be willing to give your life for Judaism? So we should be, according to this unnamed rabbi, we should be willing to do what Christians did. We should be willing to sacrifice ourselves. But Rambam rejects this comparison, arguing Jews should not imitate non-Jewish practices. Should we imitate the child sacrifices that non-Jews are engaging in also? Just because someone is committed to their religion, Islam, Judaism, whatever the case may be, does not mean that becoming a martyr is the only option that we have. Because other people are committed to becoming a martyr. Makes sense to me, but Rambam doesn't just rely on how logical that is. He brings examples. Rabbi Meir's escape. Facing execution, he pretended to be a Roman idolater by tricking them into thinking that he ate non-kosher food. I guess he stuck one food into some non-kosher food, one finger into the non-kosher food, but then he licked the other finger. So he didn't actually eat the non-kosher food. But Rambam's point was not that he tricked them and he didn't actually eat the non-kosher food. He made them think he ate the non-kosher food. Rambam's point was that he pretended to be a Roman idolater. He said, I'm not Jewish. I'm one of you. I'm an idolater, just like all of you idolaters. Look, I'll prove it. And then he pretended to eat non-kosher food. So whether he ate the non-kosher food or this was just a story crafted later, and he cleverly stuck one finger in the tray and then licked the other finger, he never ate the non-kosher food. That's not the issue. The issue is that he was publicly admitting, I'm an idolater, just like all the Romans. There's no difference between me and you. I'm one of you, one of the idolaters. That's the point that he was making. And this was acceptable to save his life. The other example was Rabbi Elazar ben Parta's escape. Arrested by early Christians, he said, what the judge says, I accept as true. So the judge was a Christian. And this Christian judge thought that he affirmed Christianity. The judge is saying, are you one of us? Are you a Christian? He says, what the judge says is true. So they said, look, he just said he's a Christian. But what he really meant was what the judge says is true. What God says is true. That's not saying what you, the Christian judge, says is true. I'm a Christian. He's saying what the judge says, Hashem is the true judge. He says it's true. Okay, we can play this word game. What did he really mean? Sounds like a politician. Did he answer the question? When you really dive into the answer, he was really saying something else, something other than what I asked him. Okay, Rambam's point is verbal affirmation under duress does not equal idolatry. I often bring up the example in Mishnah Torah that Merklios wanted you to pile up stones in front of it. Baal Peor wanted you to defecate in front of it. So, not that you would, but you could defecate in front of Merklios, and you could pile up stones in front of Merklios. There's a difference between doing an action that that deity wants you to do and saying something. Words are not action. There's a difference between using your mouth and doing an action. This action, even though viewed as avodah zarah by that deity, not viewed as avodah zarah by this deity. It's only if you're doing the action that that deity wants you to do. Then that action is avodah zarah. Here, we're not even discussing an action. We're not discussing defecating in front of this statue, piling up stones in front of that statue, taking communion, eating the bread, using wine as libations. We're not discussing any of these actions. We're talking about a verbal statement. That verbal statement is not action. So Rambam's argument is, even if he didn't say that God is what the judge said is true, if that's not referring to Hashem, even if he is agreeing with the judge, yeah, this judge says I'm a Christian, I agree. His statement is not the same as engaging in avodah zarah. That requires action, which is one of the reasons why he says you can daven in a mosque, because what Rambam considers the idolatry, the statues, the communion, those are actions. You don't find that in a mosque. So this verbal affirmation is not the same as engaging in avodah zarah. So these are the two examples that Rambam brings up. So saying that you believe in Islam and Christianity, lying about it when you're saying it, is not the same as acting on it, like bowing to idols. Only actual idolatrous acts require martyrdom. Somebody saying, make a statement or I'll behead you. I'll say whatever you want, It doesn't mean I mean it. It doesn't mean in my heart, in my mind, I believe what I'm saying. I'm saying whatever you tell me to say, so I can live to fight another day. That's not the same thing as engaging in actual idolatry. Now, contrast this with Ashkenazic tradition. This is one of those words, tradition. Is tradition obligatory? So in the Crusades, Ashkenazi Jews who chose, there's another word that flag should be raising in your mind. Ashkenazi Jews chose martyrdom rather than verbally affirming Christianity. So Rambam's leniency was not accepted. Another flag should be going up. It was not accepted in Ashkenaz. Could it have been accepted? Should it have been accepted? Well, listen, I'm not going to say people who said, I would rather die. I would rather my children die. I'd rather every Jew in this town die than make a statement that I'm a Christian. Am I going to attack them for being devout, making that choice? No. But I'm also not going to attack Jews who gave their children to Christians and said, you know what? It's better that you be raised by Christians and survive rather than die. These are choices that people make. So my view as a Rambamist is I think we should accept Rambam's position here. But it's not universally accepted. There are going to be people who will not accept it. I'm not going to fault them for it. I'm not going to say that they made the wrong choice, but I'm also not going to say you have to make that same choice. Okay. So remember when I brought up that Rambam could have just made an argument. Well, Islam is not idolatry, so they're not at fault for outwardly converting to Islam. You can daven in a mosque. There's no idolatry there. That's the easier argument that he could have made, because the case was about Muslims. He's talking about the Almohads. He wasn't talking about Christians. But he didn't make that argument. Instead, he made an argument that also applies to Christianity. So, according to Rambam, again, there's people that disagree with Islam is not idolatry. There's people that disagree. They say it is idolatry. You should not make a statement. You don't buy his argument. Okay. But according to Rambam, Islam is not idolatry because it's a monotheistic religion. He says this in Mishnah Torah. But that's not the argument that he uses here. Instead, he makes a broad claim that says any person who is forced, any forced profession of faith, even idolatry, is permissible if no action is taken. So now he's not just saying you can do this if it's Muslims wanting you to convert. He's saying even if Christians, if Hindus, if any religion that we do consider idolatrous want you to make this type of statement, it's okay. You don't have to give your life for it. So it's not just that we don't find the problematic things that we find in other religions. It's not just that those are absent from Islam, and this is people being persecuted by Islamists. He's expanding the permission to other cases that are not present here, that are not dealing with Islam, which means it applies today. Okay, so this would even apply to Christianity, which Rambam usually does consider idolatry. When he talks about Christianity, we have to talk about the timeline. He means Catholicism. Because in Rambam's time, this was before the Reformation. So Christianity was Catholicism in the time of Rambam. So there were no Protestant churches that lacked the idolatrous statues or the communion practices. I guess some churches, they don't have these statues and these types of things today. So if Rambam was alive today, he might potentially view one of these Protestant churches the same way that he views a mosque. But we didn't have these type of churches in Rambam's time, so we didn't definitively say that he would, but there's a good argument for it. So when Rambam says Christianity, he means Catholicism, but he meant all of Christianity at this time, which pretty much was Catholicism. So that's what he considered idolatry. You won't find that in Islam, which is why he allowed davening in the mosque, and he allows for Muslims to be considered eligible to be considered righteous Gentiles, which he would not allow for Christians because of them being Trinitarians. So Rambam would say a Muslim is not violating any of the 7 laws. But a Christian, he'd say you are violating one of the 7 laws. That's Rambam's his view. But potentially he would view Unitarians like he viewed Muslims or non-Jews. Rabbeinu Tam, however, he lived in France. This was Rashi's grandson. He actually takes the position that even Christianity, which meant in France, Roman Catholicism, that it was not idolatry for non-Jews because they did recognize the supremacy of God and all 3 parts are the same. So it's one God, which just has 3 sephirot, 3 emanations, a Father, a Son, and a Holy Ghost. Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, says that's not idolatry for non-Jews. Sure, it's idolatry for Jews. Rambam and Rabbeinu Tam agree. Jews should not be participating in this. However, Rambam's view that you are not a righteous Gentile if you're a non-Jew and you're a Christian, that's idolatry for non-Jews. Rabbeinu Tam, talking about Catholicism, says that's not idolatry for non-Jews. Catholics, they're not violating anything, that you would say one of these Noahites, one of these 7 law people. Catholics fit under this definition, according to Rabbeinu Tam. So there's disagreement in that same generation. So that, again, people that say, no. You're, as a non-Jew, you're not even allowed to be a Christian. According to Rabbeinu Tam, everyone's such a big fan of Rashi. Rabbeinu Tam says it's fine. Hashem does not hate non-Jews. Not even angry at Christians who participate in communion. according to Rabbeinu Tam. Rambam disagrees, but Rashi's grandson would hold that view. How often do you hear that today? So the practical implications. Okay. Forced converts should not despair. Their mitzvot are still valid. Leaders must conform, not condemn Jews in crisis. Martyrdom is required only for actions, not words. Profession of faith is not acting on it. There's a difference. Rambam's letters is a pastoral response to trauma, blending halacha, theology, and rhetoric to restore hope. This contrasts with Ashkenazic martyrdom traditions, showing differing opinions to persecution. Rambam prioritizes compassion over strict condemnation in times of crisis. Verbal affirmations under duress do not equate idolatry. Hidden righteousness exists even in sinners. This letter reflects Sephardic versus Ashkenazic differences in handling persecution. Okay. A summary of this is kind of just a recap of what we just talked about. So we'll go through it quickly. Although I think it brings up a couple new things that we didn't talk about yet. So it's worth going over. Okay. This letter was known by two different names, which we talked about. It addresses the theological dilemmas faced by Jews under forced conversion, particularly in the context, but not limited to, Islamic persecution. He wrote this letter at the age of 27 in response to an unnamed rabbi who harshly criticized Jews who outwardly converted under Islam under duress. The persecution under the Almohad dynasty forced many Jews to choose between death, exile, or nominal conversion. The rabbi declared that Jews who affirmed Islamic belief, even under coercion, were complete apostates. He actually said worse. He said, "You're not just an apostate. You're worse if you even try to do anything the Jews are obligated to do." So you're like one of these people that we pray for the downfall of. That's what the rabbi said, not me. Their mitzvot were worthless and even sinful. That's what the unnamed rabbi said. They should not bother keeping Shabbat, kashrut, or any other mitzvot. They must undergo full repentance, including immersion and sacrifice, when possible, to return to Judaism. Rambam completely opposes this view, arguing that such rulings are not only incorrect, but dangerously demoralizing. The key arguments are the permissibility of the outward conversion under duress. He argues that when faced with death, a Jew may verbally affirm a foreign faith as long as they don't actually perform idolatrous acts. He bases this on two Talmudic stories, Rabbi Meir's escape, which shows that false verbal declarations are permitted to save a life, and Rabbi Elazar ben Parta's trial, where the ambiguous answer was given. Rambam interprets this to mean that verbal denial of faith under duress is not true apostasy. You can deny your faith. If someone says you must do that. It's allowed. According to Rambam, his conclusion is that if you are forced to recite the Islamic declaration of faith, the Shahada, it does not constitute idolatry, since there is no actual worship performed, but this even extends to Christianity or other religions. Even sinners' mitzvot count. He refutes the idea that mitzvot performed by sinners are worthless. He cites biblical and Talmudic examples. King Ahab was spared immediate punishment because he honored the prophet Elijah. The king of Moab was an idolater who stood up for a prophet, and his descendant was Ruth, the ancestress of King David. A minor act of respect led to his descendant Ruth becoming the ancestor of King David, and Mashiach will be a descendant of this guy. That's quite a reward. Nebuchadnezzar He was the one that destroyed the first temple. He was actually rewarded for running to honor God's name in a letter. I guess, we know him as King Nebuchadnezzar, but before he was the king, he was a scribe for the previous king. And at some point in time, there was a story that he ran 4 miles to change something that was written about the God of Israel. Uh, this wasn't worded properly. We need to change this. So he ran to correct it before it got to its destination, so people could read it. And because of that act, he got to become the ruler of the world, the king of Babylon. And there was many, I don't know many, but there were multiple stories in the Gemara about him, and that was one of them. So due to that one act that he did that had merit, there was quite a reward given. Esau honored his father, and his descendants were the descendants of Rome. They were granted worldly power because of this act of honoring his father, which is a Torah commandment. This is a mitzvah. That somebody that fell for the Noahide scam and says you have to follow 7 mitzvot, honoring your mother and father is not one of them. But Esau did that, and he was granted, his descendants were going to be the most powerful people in the world. Even though I have to point out here, there's nothing in the Torah that actually makes him bad. You have to leave the Torah and look at other stories that demonize him. The Peshat narrative in the Torah was that he was actually not a bad guy. So Rambam's principle, God keeps 2 separate ledgers, one for mitzvot. I like to capitalize Hebrew words here, and one for sins. Even the worst sinners receive reward for their good deeds, which is something that makes a lot of sense to me. Asher was the first one to point this out to me. It seems logical that if my good deeds outweigh my bad deeds, then if I'm 51% good, 49% bad, the 49% of Averot that I did, the 49% of mitzvot, they cancel each other out. And now I'm doing 51% of good. So I am a net positive. Good deeds outweigh the bad. They wash each other. They cancel each other out. That seems like a good idea. But the context was, well, when you convert, you start over. It's like a new life. And Asher brought up a really good point. So if you raped and murdered people as an adult, as a non-Jew, you knew what you were doing was wrong. Anyone with a basic sense of morality knows it's wrong. But then later, at the end of your life, you convert to Judaism. Now it's a get out of jail free card. You're not going to be held accountable for the things you did before you converted. Most of your life was bad. Now you did a great thing. You repented and you converted to Judaism. So now your life starts over. Now when you die, there's no punishment for anything you did when you knew what you were doing was wrong. At the time you were doing it, you knew the world would define this as wrong, as rape, as murder, and you chose to do it anyway. And now you're going to say, wait a minute, I shouldn't be held accountable for that. That doesn't seem so moral. So it makes sense that if you're a sinner, yeah, we'll give you credit for the good deeds that you did. But you are still going to be held accountable, I think, for the things that you did wrong. So therefore, coerced converts must continue observing mitzvot, even if it's a mitzvah that can offset a bad deed where there was no victims. That's good. You still want to get the reward for these things, but just don't think it's gonna completely erase everything that you've done. You still may have to do some time for that. So these examples show that mitzvot and sins are accounted separately. It's not like just one ledger where I added $100 to my bank account, but then I spent 50, so now I'm still $50 ahead. They're counted separately. Debts and positive, they're accounted separately. Good deeds are not erased by sins. So even if you drive on Shabbat, that's bad, but you should still make Kiddush on Friday night. They don't cancel each other out. you still get the reward for each one and the punishment for each, according to Rambam. So even the Rasha, even the evil people that, remember, this unnamed rabbi is calling these people Rashayim, even they still get the reward for what they did. So this does sort of contradict. Remember, Rambam says if you don't believe in his 13 principles, then you're not a Jew. Okay, so I guess he would say that if you don't believe in his 13th principle, then you are forfeiting all of these rewards by saying, I'm voluntarily not a Jew because I don't accept it, Rambam's 13 principles. But there's people like Yosef Alba who said it's not 13 principles, it's only 3. And then there's some other rabbi who said you don't have to accept any of the principles. You only have to accept one. You just have to accept that there is a God and do what he says to do. Follow the mitzvot. So there's debate about these 13, but obviously Rambam's principles is you have to believe in these 13. But then I would ask Rambam, okay, well, I had an issue with some of your, don't they still get the mitzvot? That's a bit of a debate. All right, so when is martyrdom required versus permitted? So he clarifies the laws of Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name through martyrdom, the 3 cardinal sins requiring martyrdom: idolatry, which is actual worship, an action, not just a verbal declaration; murder, you should be willing to give up your life and become a martyr rather than murdering innocent people; and sexual immorality, incest, adultery. Halakhically, that's the halakha. You should be willing to, halakhically, you should do lots of things. If you fall short in all of the other mitzvot, we still tell you mitzvot count. Next time, maybe you'll make a different decision, but you don't just stop following mitzvot because you fell short in shotness, because you fell short. You didn't keep Shabbat this week. You didn't keep kosher today. You ate something you shouldn't have. Shame on you. You missed the mark. Try harder next time. What if you fall short on one of these 3? Yeah, you should have followed the halakha, given your life. But just like you fell short and didn't keep kosher, just like you fell short, you didn't keep Shabbat, just like you fell short, didn't give your life and become a martyr for one of these, you still have to follow the mitzvot. So if it comes up again, what's my advice to you going to be? If you ask me, do I have to keep Shabbat? Yes. Do I have to keep kosher? Yes. Can I drive on Shabbat? No. Should I give my life instead of murdering people? Yes. What if I didn't do any of those? Okay. We'll try harder next time. You ask me the same questions. My answer going to be the same? Yes. Should I keep Shabbat? Yes. Should I give my life rather than murder people? Yes. What if I fall short again? Okay. Try harder next time. You know what I mean? So all other mitzvot, including Shabbat, Kashrut, they may be violated in order to save a life. Ruach nefesh. Although we'll see later where it becomes potentially contradictory based on the intent. This is what I was talking about. We'll read the rest of it. If the rodef, the one that's a threat to you, if he has certain intentions and if the transgression is done publicly, of course, opinions will exist on both sides of the issue. So according to the opinion about the shoes, if we're Jews, we put on our right shoe first, and someone says, you're going to put on your left shoe first. So is everybody in the country, all non-Jews as well. Do you need to give up your life for that? No. This is not being directed as you, as a Jew, as a way to stamp out Judaism. This is just some crazy decree that everyone's got to comply with. You do not need to give up your life. Let's say he pulls you into a room, and now he says, this decree is nothing to do with the rest of the population. Non-Jews can put on shoes whatever order they want. You, I know you're Jewish. You're going to put on your left shoe first. I want to erase Judaism. I know you're Jewish. I'm stamping it out. Should you give up your life for this? No. You're in a room by yourself. Who sees what type of shoes, what order you're putting them on? Nobody. It's you and this crazy dictator. You do not need to give up your life. Now, if it's publicly, he rounds up Jews and he says, okay, this decree is to stamp out Judaism, and it's publicly, you should resist. You should say, okay, it's not one of the big three. We can't assimilate. We can't let Judaism be eliminated. Should you give up your life? His opinions would say yes, even though this is not one of the big three. It's not a decree for everybody. It's specifically the intention is to get rid of Judaism. It's being done publicly. And this is what some of the Ashkenazi Jews said. They'd rather be a martyr rather than give up on anything, not criticizing them. But you see the different metrics here. Is it one of the big three or is it not? Is it not one of the three, but it's for everybody? Or is the intent to stamp out Judaism? Is this the intent publicly, or is this just for you privately? In other words, privately you can do whatever. I'll put on my shoes in whatever order you want. Just let me live. I'll denounce Judaism. I'll do whatever. And then I'll leave this private room and I'll go out publicly and I'll tell Jews, I said, kill me. I'm not going to do it. This was a private situation. It wasn't done publicly. So there's much more to the conversation. To should you give your life, should you not? It's a deeper conversation. Coerced converts who merely recite false creed without worship, they do not need to die. Coerced converts remain Jews. Rambam emphasizes that those who convert under duress are not true apostates. They must continue Jewish observance secretly. He harshly criticizes the unnamed rabbi for discouraging mitzvah observance, calling this a greater sin than the forced conversion itself. Even if they simply sinned by converting, their mitzvot still have value and they must not abandon Judaism. Controversial aspects of the letter: leniency on forced conversions. Some criticized Rambam for being too lenient, arguing that any affirmation of Islam, even verbal, should be forbidden. I mean, these were people saying, like this rabbi, speak words? No, you have to die. You can't say those words, even if you don't mean them, even if you're not sincere. So there were people that disagreed with him, that felt like we should die. There's people today that don't care how many Jews get slaughtered. They want what they want. This is what they believe. If all Jews have to die, so be it. We're going to do what we want and we don't care. And it's really always been that way. This is the story of Masada. The rabbi said, do not stand up against the Romans. It's going to be a disaster for us. And what did the zealots say? We don't care how many Jews get killed. We are not gonna allow this. We're gonna fight. If some Jews die, if most Jews die, if all Jews die, let them die. We don't care how many Jews get killed. We're gonna do it. And the zealots went against the advice of the rabbis. And what happened at Masada? All died. They didn't listen to the rabbis. Same thing happens today. People say, we don't care how many Jews have to be sacrificed. If it's all of them, so be it. It's unfortunate, but there's people on both sides that say things. My advice is to be on the side that serves the lives of Jews, but as we see, there's people that disagree. Leniency on forced conversion. Some criticized, saying that any affirmation, even verbal, should be forbidden. Rambam disagreed. Definition of idolatry. Rambam distinguishes between verbal denial, permitted under duress, and actual worship. There's a difference between actions and just verbally making statements. Statements are not the same as action. Well, we said this. Does that mean we're actually going to do it? Two different things. This was debated by later authorities. Psychological versus halakhic impact. He prioritizes compassion. Remember, we're discussing the letter. Mishnah Torah discusses halakha, written later. Recognizing that harsh rulings would crush Jewish morale after persecution. That was the priority in the letter. His letter is a bold defense of Jews who faced conversion, combining halakhic creativity. He reinterpreted Talmudic cases to permit verbal compliance. I'm going to tell you something that I learned from a rabbi at a congregation I used to be a member of. He said that he was a conservative, still is a conservative rabbi. He was raised and ordained Orthodox, then later became conservative. The reason he said he did that was that he said he was tired of looking in the Talmud and saying, "What? Why are we doing this today like this? Look at what the Talmud says." And hearing Orthodox rabbis tell him, "We don't apply that law. We don't like that law. We pretend like that's there. We ignore that." So he says the Talmud can provide guidance, but it cannot dictate the final halakha. Even though this individual later says things that contradicts that, I thought it was a great statement that he made. And that's what Rambam is doing here. He's reinterpreting Talmudic guidance to permit verbal compliance. He's not just saying, "Hey, I'm Rambam. I'm popular. I'm well respected. I can make a new statement, and you better agree with it. You think you know better than me? You know better than the Rambam? No, you more popular than me? There's a popular rabbi that disagrees. Well, I know a rabbi that's more popular than him. Who are you to criticize this rabbi?" He didn't do that. He went to the Talmud and said, "Look, there's precedence for this. You are using the Talmud to provide guidance, to give you what you think these Jews should be slaughtered. Okay, I'm using the same Talmud. I'm using the same exact sources in the Talmud to say there's a precedent to say it does not have to be this way. There are cases that said these rabbis said that they were idolaters. They went along with it. They convinced idolaters that we were idolaters like them. We denounced Judaism in order to stay alive. So who are you to tell these people they can't do what the big rabbis in the Talmud did? That they have to let their families be slaughtered because you interpret the Talmud this way? There's stories in the Talmud that say the exact opposite. So he's using Talmudic cases to make his case. So I 100% agree. So again, the rabbi that said that, again, he went on to say things that you could say contradicts what he's saying, but that's another thing. He was laying down a principle that we see Rambam using. So to his credit. So pastoral sensitivity. He encouraged continuing mitzvah observance rather than despair. Theological clarity. The reward for the mitzvot is never erased, even for sinners. His ruling became foundational for Jewish communities facing persecution, offering a balance between survival and faithfulness. Okay, we're going to stop here because the next class is going to go over the second half of this, which is more pages. It's actually even longer, but this may have been the longer portion because there was more principles in here that we talked about. We had longer sessions of deviating the text to discuss it. So even though there's more pages to go through next week, doesn't necessarily mean it will be longer. And then we'll be done with this part of the letter. Yochanan, I see it looks like you just came in. I'm going to stop the recording, but make sure if you weren't here from the beginning, there's things in here where I kind of addressed you. So I don't know if you heard it or not, but next week is probably not going to be Tuesday because I'm going to be coming back from New York. I don't know if I'll be here Tuesday. So next week, Ash had a great idea. Let's move it to Wednesday. So next week, Ash class will probably be on Wednesday instead of Tuesday, and we'll finish this letter. And hopefully we'll have lots of good stories to talk about. 2 weeks in a row before we started recording, we just had good news after good news after good news. Bezrat Hashem, next week will be the same. 3 weeks in a row with lots of positive things to talk about. And I'll see you all next week. Thanks for being here. Everybody have a good week.